Evelyn Monroe stood at the bustling terminal of John F. Kennedy International Airport with a quiet determination that belied the storm brewing inside her. Clad in a well-tailored navy blue pantsuit and with her dark hair neatly tied back, she carried the weight of her dual identity. On one hand, a seasoned traveler with a fully paid first-class ticket for seat 3A, and on the other, an undercover federal auditor tasked with uncovering the ugly face of discrimination in air travel. The morning sun streamed through high glass panels, bathing the terminal's polished floors and busy corridors in a crisp light that did little to soften the palpable tension in the air. Every step she took was measured and deliberate, as if she were treading the fine line between the world of everyday commuters and the hidden realm of high-stakes justice. Evelyn's journey began with an unassuming grace. As she stepped off the escalator, her eyes fixated on the entrance to the jet bridge, she exuded a dignity that even the most skeptical onlookers could not ignore. Yet beneath that calm exterior, she braced herself for what was to come. A confrontation that would expose not only her own vulnerability, but also the sinister forces of racism and prejudice lurking behind the polished facade of modern air travel. Travelers milled about with their oversized suitcases and children clutched stuffed animals, creating a symphony of activity that contrasted sharply with the silent scrutiny aimed in her direction. When a few disapproving murmurs emerged, questioning her right to occupy a seat that had been reserved in advance, it was as if a foreboding wind had blown through the terminal, signaling the onset of a confrontation steeped in hostility and a long history of racial injustice. The atmosphere became charged as Evelyn navigated her way to the gate. The overhead signs and digital displays only heightened the sense of organized chaos within Terminal 8. Passengers in sharp business attire tapped away on their laptops, while families hustled and bustled in a coordinated frenzy. Amid this sea of activity, Evelyn's internal checklist was running like clockwork. In a quiet corner near a tall, imposing column, she reviewed the numerous internal memos she had painstakingly studied the previous night. Reports detailing subtle yet painfully regular incidents of harassment, humiliation, and outright discrimination experienced by travelers of color. Each word of those memos resonated within her as a solemn promise that she would not let these injustices remain hidden any longer. After clearing security without incident, her official credentials tucked away in a secret compartment of her purse, Evelyn made her way to Gate 23B. The large display overhead announced Flight AA-198 to Los Angeles, and as she approached, the meticulous organization at the boarding area struck her. An older couple in matching travel sweaters whispered to each other in a corner, exchanging furtive glances that hinted at an unspoken bias. Even the man's discreet side-eye as he glanced in her direction spoke volumes about the judgment that so many had cast upon her merely because of the color of her skin. To others, it might have been a passing remark, but to Evelyn, every look was an indictment of a system built on prejudice. It was a system she had vowed to expose, and that vow burned as fiercely within her as it did in the hearts of those who had endured similar indignities over the years. When the time for boarding finally arrived, a chill seemed to settle over the area. The gate agent, a woman with meticulously arranged features and a hairstyle that screamed corporate efficiency, stepped forward with a stack of paperwork and a microphone that crackled softly with static. Evelyn, with her head held high and her heart pounding, advanced to the front of the line, her boarding pass and identification in hand. There was an undercurrent in the gate agent's gaze, a scrutiny that was anything but random. As she took in the details of Evelyn's travel documents, her expression shifted from a benign smile to one of icy determination, as if the very sight of Evelyn's name on the boarding pass had triggered a series of calculated suspicions. At first, the exchange was polite, almost rehearsed. The agent confirmed Evelyn's seat 3A in the exclusive first-class cabin, with a clinical tone that belied the tension simmering beneath the surface. Yet the moment of apparent acceptance was shattered when the agent's smile abruptly froze upon realizing the zone designated on Evelyn's boarding pass. In a voice that dripped with barely concealed disdain, The agent questioned Evelyn once more, demanding to see her identification again. Evelyn's heart raced as she handed over her driver's license, the familiar plastic card a silent testament to her right to be where she was. But the agent's eyes, dark and unyielding, lingered too long on the details of the document, as though searching for any inkling of a discrepancy that might justify a mistake. With each second that ticked by, the murmurs of onlookers grew louder, their whispers blending into a chorus of judgment that cut through the ambient noise of the terminal. Within moments, the situation escalated dramatically. As first-class boarding was finally announced, Evelyn found herself torn between her desire for a quiet flight and the determination to stand her ground. She stepped forward, ticket in hand, only to be intercepted by a cascade of bureaucratic hostility. The previously courteous gate agent now spoke with a rigid authority that left no room for negotiation. A recalibration of the flight's seating assignments had been suddenly declared, a sudden twist of fate that reared its ugly head in the form of a double booking claim. Evelyn's insistence on her legal right to occupy seat 3A was met with a scathing, emotionless rebuke that made it clear she was to be relegated to economy class, condemned to endure humiliation in an environment where every detail, from the cramped seats to the diminished legroom, spoke of substandard condition. In that moment, as she tried to explain that her reservation was incontrovertible and that no prior announcement had been made regarding any seat changes or equipment modifications, it became unmistakably clear that this was about far more than a scheduling error. It was a deliberate act of racial discrimination. The agent's tone grew harsher with each word, and the indifferent flight attendant beside her added to the chorus of unwarranted authority. They insisted that Evelyn abandon her rightful place in first class for the sake of a premium passenger's convenience, a claim that had no basis in the documented policies of any reputable airline. All the while, the other passengers watched with a mix of curiosity and thinly veiled contempt, as if they were witnessing a spectacle rather than a grave injustice. Despite the oppressive air of indignity, Evelyn's spirit refused to be crushed. Her eyes, a mirror of quiet resolve and unspoken pain, scanned the faces of those around her. The silver-hailed gentleman across the aisle, the older couple now seated a few rows ahead, and even the woman in stylish sunglasses with her designer bag all bore expressions that betrayed a conflict between empathy and the rigid adherence to social hierarchies. For Evelyn, the incident was not merely an inconvenience. It was a rallying cry against a pernicious system that had targeted her for far too long. It was at that moment that she resolved to make her stand, even if it meant risking everything, by challenging the status quo. "I have a fully paid first-class ticket," Evelyn declared firmly, her voice steady despite the tumult raging within her. "If there's an issue, I'd very much like to see the documentation or speak with a supervisor." Her tone was neither aggressive nor meek. It was an appeal for justice, cloaked in the polite firmness characteristic of someone who had weathered many storms but refused to yield. The gate agent's expression darkened further, the faint flush on her cheeks betraying a hint of panic that her authority might be challenged. "We are the authority here," she snapped coldly, her words echoing in the charged silence that had befallen the cabin. "You can either move to economy or catch another flight." It was an ultimatum, delivered with a confidence that masked a deep-seated insecurity, a fear that the truth might disrupt the carefully maintained facade of privilege. As Evelyn's pulse quickened, she sensed that this confrontation was only the beginning of a battle that had been raging behind the scenes for decades. Every microaggression, every subtle sneer, and every dismissive gesture was a thread in a vast tapestry of racial injustice that she had sworn to unravel. In that fraught moment, while the agent's eyes flitted nervously between her and the indifferent flight attendant, a spark was ignited. A spark of defiance that would soon engulf the entire situation in a blaze of retributive fire. Evelyn knew that her plight was not merely personal, it was emblematic of countless other stories of marginalization and cruelty that had been swept under the rug. And as she stood there, her figure resolute against the tide of derision, she made a silent vow that if fate forced her into the cramped confines of economy class, then she would not go quietly into the night. Instead, she would marshal every ounce of her inner strength and expose the depths of the system's corruption. The chilly breeze of injustice that had settled over the jet bridge soon turned into a roaring tempest. A man in a crisp business suit, standing just behind her, passed the agent with barely a glance, his boarding pass accepted without the slightest scrutiny. Another well-dressed woman, complete with designer sunglasses and an air of entitlement, moved forward smoothly, her every step a testament to a system that favored her type. In stark contrast, Evelyn was left to face a barrage of humiliating reassurances that resonated not with the warmth of hospitality, but with the icy sting of discrimination. Her heart pounded as she tried to hold on to the sliver of hope that perhaps a fair-minded supervisor would soon intervene. Instead, the agent's eyes narrowed into a glare that conveyed both contempt and a desperate need to assert dominance, as if Evelyn's very presence was a threat to an established order that had existed long before any of them had stepped foot in the terminal. Minutes later, as she was finally ushered into the narrow confines of the first-class cabin only to be interrupted by yet another wave of authority, Evelyn's hope began to waver under the crushing weight of injustice. Just as she had settled into the luxurious embrace of her seat, a spacious, plush recliner that promised a momentary respite from the chaos, the very agents of discrimination returned. The same steely gaze and dismissive tone that had marked their earlier encounter re-emerged with renewed ferocity. The gate agent, her voice now sharp as a razor, announced that due to a double booking for a premium passenger, Evelyn must relinquish her rightful seat and move to coach. The announcement sent a ripple of shock and dismay through the first-class cabin, with curious glances exchanged among passengers who, though silently complicit, could not entirely hide their disapproval. In that charged moment, every detail of the confrontation was amplified, a bittersweet symphony of indignities that ranged from the overt to the subliminal. Evelyn's pulse raced as she grappled with the dual sensations of intense humiliation and a burning desire for vindication. Her mind raced with memories of past encounters in which she had been repeatedly made to feel lesser simply because of the color of her skin, and every scar left by those experiences only deepened her resolve. While the rest of the cabin absorbed the shock in a subdued murmur, Evelyn's eyes met those of an elderly woman across the aisle, a lady of about 65 years old, with kind yet sorrowful eyes, who seemed to silently plead for justice on behalf of all those who had suffered in silence. It was a look that resonated with the timeless struggle against oppression, a struggle that was now reflected in every line on Evelyn's face, every determined step she took, and every measured word that she spoke. Despite the mounting evidence of racial bias and the agent's brazen defiance, Evelyn refused to retreat. With a calm that belied the turmoil inside her, she challenged the gate agent's authority. "I must insist on speaking with a senior official, someone who can explain this discrepancy," she said, her voice resonating with both dignity and the resolve to reclaim what was rightfully hers. The agent's eyes flashed, a malignant glint betraying her inner rage, and her thin smile quickly vanished. "We have already made our decision," she replied curtly, her tone dripping with an arrogance born of privilege. "Your seat is needed for someone who is more appropriate for first class." The term hung in the air like a poisoned arrow, a stark reminder that this was not merely an error in reservation, but a calculated act of prejudice, one that aimed to strip Evelyn of her dignity and enforce the boundaries of an outdated social order. For a long, agonizing moment, the cabin was suspended in a tense silence, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant murmur of passengers digesting what was unfolding before them. Evelyn felt a deep, searing pain, an emotional wound inflicted by the subtle, insidious cruelty of racism. Yet within that pain, a new determination was being forged, a determination that would one day bring about a retributive justice so monumental it would leave every observer gasping in astonishment. This was not a simple request for a change in seating. It was a bold declaration against a system that had long tolerated discrimination and allowed the powerful to trample on the rights of those deemed unworthy. In the depths of her heart, Evelyn knew that this confrontation, as humiliating as it was, would be the catalyst for a vengeance that was destined to shake the very foundations of the airline industry. Her mind whirled with thoughts of retribution, a response so grand and sweeping that it would force every authority, every policymaker, and every critic of injustice to stand in awe. The idea of taking those who had wronged her, of exposing their treachery in a blaze of public fury, filled her with a fervor that bordered on the poetic. She envisioned a future where every passenger, regardless of their background, would be treated with the respect they deserved. A future where the scales of justice would finally tip in favor of the oppressed. And while that future seemed a long way off, in that precise moment, Evelyn understood that she was about to play her part in igniting a revolution against systemic discrimination. The conversation with the gate agent reached an impasse as the designated officials remained silent, unwilling to intervene in what they saw as an administrative error. Yet, beneath the surface of that impasse lay a simmering potential for chaos, one that Evelyn was poised to unleash. In a voice that trembled only slightly, she said, "If this is the way you treat passengers, then you haven't seen anything yet. I will document every detail of this injustice. When the evidence is laid bare, the truth will make it impossible for you to hide behind policies and procedures." Her words, calm yet laced with quiet fury, carried the weight of a promise that the era of silent suffering was drawing to a close. At that moment, as the final boarding call echoed through the cabin and the last vestiges of privilege seemed to hang in the balance, Evelyn Monroe's fate was sealed. The ensuing minutes promised not only a test of her resolve, but also the birth of a movement driven by the spirits of those who had been mistreated for far too long. In the gentle murmur of the first-class cabin, every passenger bore witness to the clash of two worlds, one that upheld the illusion of entitlement and one that demanded accountability and respect. It was a confrontation that, regardless of its outcome, would leave an indelible mark on everyone present. Though her heart ached with sorrow for every painful memory and every marginalizing gesture she had endured over the years, Evelyn knew that her struggle was not solitary. The silent nods of approval from a few perceptive travelers, the compassionate glimmer in the eyes of an elderly woman across the aisle, and even the hesitant expressions of remorse from those who had once turned a blind eye, all served as affirmations that justice, though delayed, would eventually come. In that moment of profound vulnerability, she resolved that even if she were forced into an economy seat that might confine her both physically and symbolically, she would not be broken. Instead, she would harness that energy into a campaign for change that would resonate far beyond the confines of that single flight. As the final act of that dramatic encounter unfolded, the gate agent's cold dismissal and the attendant's unwavering support for a flawed decision only deepened the chasm between good and evil. The agent's calculated cruelty, her blatant favoritism toward those who fit a narrow definition of worthiness, left Evelyn with a profound sense of pity for herself. A pity not born out of weakness, but from the recognition of the inherent injustice that plagued the system. Every protocol violated, every dismissive remark, and every subtle sneer was a reminder that the battle for equality was far from over, and that her moment of recompense was yet to come. In a voice that barely masked her sorrow and simmering rage, Evelyn concluded, "I have been overlooked, diminished, and marginalized for too long. This isn't just about a seat. It's about my right to be treated fairly and with dignity." Her declaration, delivered with the measured cadence of someone who had faced the worst that society could offer, reverberated through the cabin, capturing the attention of every onlooker. The raw emotion in her tone, the vulnerability intertwined with an unyielding resolve, cast a spell over the room, a promise that sooner or later the scales of justice would finally be set right. Looking around, she felt both the weight of a lifetime of indignities and the spark of a revolutionary spirit stirring within her. In that charged moment, as if in defiance of all the prejudices that had once kept her in the shadows, Evelyn Monroe silently vowed that her ordeal would not be the end of her story. Rather, it would be the opening chapter in a saga of retribution that would not only challenge the authority of those who had wronged her, but also expose the deep-seated racism festering within the corridors of power. And as she prepared herself for the inevitable trials ahead, every fiber of her being braced for a counterstrike that would be both resounding and breathtakingly just. It was then that the seeds of a grand transformation were sown. In the echo of her soft yet determined protest, every person present in that hallowed cabin felt the stirrings of a change long overdue, a change that would forever alter the dynamics of travel, of service, and of the very notion of respect. The injustice inflicted upon her that day was not an isolated incident, but the tip of a massive iceberg that had long remained unseen beneath the surface of polite society. And as the plane rumbled toward takeoff, its engines thrumming in anticipation of a long journey ahead, Evelyn Monroe's mind raced with plans not for mere reparation, but for a full-scale reclamation of dignity. A reclamation so grand that it would leave every onlooker, every administrator, and every casual critic utterly spellbound. In that unforgettable exchange, where every second bore the weight of history and every word was a declaration of war against injustice, Evelyn found herself on the precipice of a new beginning. With each meticulously measured breath, she resolved to document every moment, to expose every detail of the callous disregard for a passenger's rights, and even if the immediate consequences of that confrontation forced her into an inferior seating arrangement, her true victory lay in the revelations that were soon to come, a cascade of evidence so explosive that it would force regulatory bodies, government officials, and even corporate executives to face the truth that had long been swept under the rug. For in the heart of that turbulent morning at JFK, while others merely witnessed a routine boarding procedure, Evelyn Monroe had ignited a spark. And that spark, nurtured by years of silent suffering and steeled by an unyielding desire for justice, promised to burst into a conflagration of accountability and retribution. It was not just her fight. It was the battle of every individual who had ever been belittled, overlooked, or judged solely by the color of their skin. And as the airplane's wheels finally lifted off the tarmac, leaving behind a trail of disturbed convention and the echoes of injustice, Evelyn's quiet resolve transformed into a roar that would resonate throughout the corridors of power. In that defining moment, when the injustice of being forced out of her rightful seat was laid bare for all to see, Evelyn Monroe silently vowed that her struggle was only the prologue to a magnificent upheaval. A reckoning was coming. A reckoning that would transform not just her own life, but also the lives of countless others who had suffered in silence. And while the pain of the past mingled with the determination of the present, one thing was abundantly clear. This was not the end of her journey, but the dramatic beginning of a battle that would change the narrative of discrimination forever. The first-class cabin, once a sanctuary of privilege for the few, had inadvertently become the stage for an act of defiance that promised to alter the course of history. And as Evelyn, with eyes that shone with a mix of sorrow, resilience, and unquenchable desire for justice, prepared herself to face whatever lay ahead, every soul in that cabin, whether complicit in indifference or silently supportive, could not help but feel the stirring of something monumental. It was as though each ticking second carried the potential for transformation, a turning point in an ongoing story of intolerance that, with Evelyn's intervention, was destined for a spectacular and awe-inspiring vindication. In that moment of confrontation on the jet bridge, the full weight of systemic prejudice and institutional malice was laid bare. Yet even as the agents of discrimination reveled in their temporary victory, a countercurrent of hope and righteous fury had begun to swell within Evelyn Monroe, and for those who had borne witness, a mix of elderly bystanders, compassionate strangers, and even the hesitant admittance of a few guilty souls, the promise was unmistakable. Change was coming, and it would be as bold, relentless, and transformative as the very spirit of justice itself. Evelyn's story on that fateful day was far from over. It was only the beginning of an epic struggle. A struggle that, though wrought with personal sacrifice and searing pain, would ultimately deliver a retributive blow so grand that it would leave both oppressors and supporters equally astonished. Her determination, forged in the fires of racial injustice and tempered by years of quiet endurance, was about to become the catalyst for an extraordinary response. And though her forced downgrade from first class to coach might have seemed like a minor setback in the grand scheme of travel, it was, in truth, the spark that would ignite an avalanche of accountability and retribution so powerful that the entire world would have to take notice. Thus, standing amidst the hushed whispers and furtive glances of that first-class cabin, Evelyn Monroe vowed that her long-festering pain would finally find its voice. The humiliation inflicted upon her that day was a wound that would not easily heal. Yet, it was that very wound that would, in time, metamorphose into a battle cry, a resounding declaration of dignity, retribution, and unyielding hope. And as the plane soared into the sky, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings and the imperishable spirit of those who dared to stand up against injustice, Evelyn knew in her heart that her fight, though arduous, was destined to reshape the very foundations of a society long content with inequity. In that singular, unforgettable moment, Evelyn Monroe transformed from a quiet observer into a warrior for justice, a warrior whose determined gaze and calm, deliberate words would later become a rallying point for all who had ever been oppressed by a heartless system. And though the flight ahead might be fraught with additional challenges, every mile traversed was a testament to her enduring resilience and the hope for a tomorrow where equality and respect were not just ideals, but lived realities for every traveler, every citizen, and every soul denied the dignity they deserved. Evelyn Monroe felt the sting of injustice deepen as she took in the unfolding scene. No sooner had she been forced from her rightful seat in first class than the tension in the cabin escalated into a drama of entitlement and blatant discrimination. Standing in the corridor between first class and coach, Evelyn observed a white passenger dressed in an immaculate suit with an expensive-looking watch glinting on his wrist, casually checking his phone as if he had a million better places to be. With a soft but determined tone, Evelyn asked him, "Excuse me, did you also book seat 3A?" The man, caught off guard by her gentle inquiry, crossed his arms and replied simply, "Yes," his tone laced with an air of superiority that immediately set her nerves on edge. Although an overbooking could be a mere scheduling mishap, the situation reeked of favoritism. Evelyn knew all too well that in the world of air travel, subtle acts of racism often masqueraded as innocent administrative. Evelyn's mind raced as she replayed every detail of the earlier ordeal. The cold, dismissive tone of Karen White, the gate agent whose eyes had burned with an unspoken prejudice, the casual cruelty of the flight attendant Veronica, and the unyielding support given to that well-dressed man who assumed his rightful seat based solely on appearance. It was clear to Evelyn that behind the administrative procedures and reassurances lay a systematic bias that targeted her simply for being black. The realization stung with the weight of countless similar stories she had recorded over the years. Stories of passengers brushed aside, dehumanized by a system that valued skin color over the truth of a ticket. Forced into a cramped seat in economy, Evelyn found herself squeezed into row 25, sandwiched between strangers who remained oblivious to the magnitude of the injustice. The overhead bin was so packed that she had no choice but to stow her bag several rows back, away from the chaos of her dislocated status. The man next to the window was entirely engrossed in his mobile game, and the woman on the aisle was busy rummaging through her purse, indifferent to the simmering storm that had just left its mark on Evelyn's spirit. Despite the physical discomfort of the economy cabin and the sting of betrayal that gnawed at her heart, Evelyn clung to her professional resolve like a lifeline. With a discreet glance at her phone, she recorded every detail: the flight number, the reassignment, the name on the gate agent's badge, Karen White, and even the tag on the flight attendant Veronica's uniform. In her mind, each recorded note was not only evidence of personal humiliation, but a rallying cry against a system that had, for far too long, taken for granted the rights of those it deemed inferior. Minutes later, as the aircraft began taxiing, a determined look crossed Evelyn's face. The hum of the engines became a background score to her internal monologue, a promise that she would transform this travesty into a historic moment of retribution. It was not simply a matter of a misplaced seat, it was an affront to her dignity and a microcosm of a larger systemic prejudice that demanded to be exposed. In the cramped confines of her economy seat, she fumbled with her tablet, scanning through official documents and previous passenger testimonies that echoed experiences strikingly similar to hers. The cabin around her buzzed with a mix of normalcy and latent tension. Some passengers dozed off, others flipped through in-flight magazines, and a few cast curious glances her way. Yet, beneath the facade of routine, Evelyn could sense that every whispered comment and every subtle head turn was imbued with silent judgment, a constant reminder that she was being marked as an outsider. Approximately 40 minutes into the flight, as Evelyn tried to piece together the tapestry of injustice around her, a ripple of murmured conversation swept along the aisle. Her attention was drawn to a tall, visibly agitated man in a pilot's uniform, missing only his jacket. And it wasn't long before she recognized him as Captain Richard Harding from the pre-flight information screen. Flanking him was Lourdes, the lead flight attendant, whose anxious expression spoke of concerns far deeper than a routine mix-up in seating arrangements. Their arrival by her row was no ordinary visit. It signaled that, even high up in the chain of command, questions were being raised about how her case had been handled. "Ms. Monroe, may we speak with you for a moment?" Captain Harding said with a measured politeness that barely concealed his concern. Evelyn rose slowly, careful not to disturb the sleepy passenger beside her, and followed the duo toward the small galley area behind first class. Shielded from prying eyes by a modest curtain, the trio's conversation began in low, deliberate tones. Captain Harding initiated the discussion by acknowledging the mishap. "I understand you had an issue with your seat in first class." His voice, though even, carried the weight of responsibility. Evelyn confirmed the allegation. Despite her confirmed ticket, she had been reassigned to economy because of a claim of double booking, a claim that made no sense at all to her. As she recounted the events, Evelyn noted with both frustration and quiet determination the names of those involved: the dismissive gate agent, the indifferent flight attendant Veronica, and others who had sprung into action only after the fact. It was precisely this cavalier attitude, this blind deference to appearances over rights, that enraged her. The captain's brow furrowed as he admitted, "Normally, if there's an overbooking in first class, we handle it before boarding so that the passenger who paid first or holds higher status gets priority. I'm trying to figure out why you were singled out." His tone, imbued with genuine regret, was a stark contrast to the callous manner in which the earlier decision had been executed. Lourdes added in a soft voice that they were prepared to make amends by offering her a seat in first class, seat 5 CE, with a sincere apology for the distress caused. For a fleeting moment, Evelyn considered the offer. After all, To return to first class would be to regain a part of the dignity that had been so abruptly stripped away. Yet, as her eyes met those of Captain Harding and Laura, she could not shake the lingering suspicion that this sudden corrective measure was less about fairness and more about smoothing over a potentially illegal, discriminatory act. "Thank you," she said, cautiously accepting the new seat, "but I do have concerns that I intend to address after this flight." The captain and Laura exchanged a troubled glance, their silence speaking volumes about the gravity of the situation. Before she could settle in her new seat, Evelyn's mind buzzed with the need to document every nuance of the interaction. She filed every detail with precision, from the captain's sincere yet perplexed expression to the furtive glances that Veronica, now appearing remorseful, cast in passing. In a final interaction that encapsulated the unresolved tension, Veronica approached with a service tray. "Ms. Monroe, I'm sorry if there was any confusion earlier," she said softly, as she placed a small snack basket on the center console. Evelyn managed a polite, if distant, smile in response, and when Veronica offered a complimentary beverage, she asked for a glass of champagne. A subtle test of the extent of the airline's courtesy. As Veronica hurried off, nearly colliding with a passenger, Evelyn tapped a note into her phone to record the incident, along with the details of Veronica's explanation, the supposed instructions coming from the gate agent. Deep inside, Evelyn's heart churned with conflicting emotions. Here she was, a woman who had endured yet another public humiliation, whose every reaction was now being scrutinized not just for evidence, but as a testament to how deep the roots of racial bias ran within the organization. She recalled other accounts of minority travelers who had been similarly disrespected, passengers in vibrant hues of cultural pride who found themselves repeatedly pushed aside under the guise of booking errors or technical glitches. The pattern was clear and damning. As the flight progressed, Evelyn's resolve hardened. Every glance, every whispered comment was fuel to the blaze of determination burning within her. She would not allow herself to be a silent victim. Instead, the humiliation of being bumped from a legitimately purchased seat would serve as the spark for a retribution that would shake the very foundations of airline protocols. At 23:13, another flight attendant, different from Veronica, appeared with a chilled flute of champagne to check if anything further was needed. Evelyn accepted the gesture with a measured nod, her smile polite but her eyes revealing the depth of betrayal and the promise of a counterstrike that would leave those responsible reeling. Every moment of the flight was now charged with the electricity of imminent justice. Evelyn Monroe's ordeal had evolved from a personal grievance into the opening act of a grand, unapologetic challenge to systemic racism and the establishment that allowed it to thrive. Even as she sipped the champagne and settled into the plush surroundings of her new first-class seat, her mind raced with plans to expose, document, and ultimately overturn a legacy of discrimination that had long gone unchallenged. And in that decisive moment, as the engines roared and the cabin lights dimmed to signal the onset of night flight, Evelyn resolved that her story would not remain confined within the narrow walls of a single aircraft. Instead, it would serve as the clarion call for a sweeping change, a revolution that would leave everyone watching utterly astounded by the might of retributive justice. Evelyn Monroe's journey was far from over. In that turbulent mid-flight exchange, she had not only endured the raw cruelty of prejudice, but had also set the stage for a magnificent comeback. The injustice she had suffered would be her impetus, and through meticulous evidence and an unwavering commitment to truth, she would ensure that her pain became the cornerstone of a movement capable of dismantling the barriers that had oppressed so many. And as the flight pressed on into the night sky, every mile bringing her closer to her destination, Evelyn's silent promise reverberated through the cabin. A promise of accountability, transformation, and a retribution so grand that those who had once wielded their power with thoughtless cruelty would eventually be forced to reckon with their wrongs. Evelyn Monroe let her eyes wander around the lavish first-class cabin, trying to steady her racing heart while every detail of the earlier debacle played in her mind like a relentless film reel. The man who had taken her original seat 3A before had now sunk into his laptop with an air of absolute entitlement, occasionally sipping from his water bottle as if to remind everyone that he belonged in that exclusive space. The older couple, who had once shot her disdainful glances during boarding, were now dozing quietly, their earlier judgment replaced by the calm of the moment. Yet, amidst this apparent serenity, Evelyn sensed the ominous gathering of further turbulence. Just as time seemed to slow to a crawl, like the eerie calm in the eye of a hurricane, a sharp buzz from her phone broke the silence. It was a text message from Marcus Nguyen, her fellow investigator, who was covertly working on the same case from a different section of the plane. They had been assigned to different parts of the aircraft as standard procedure for these discreet audits. The screen displayed, Marcus 12:47 p.m. Heard you got bumped to coach. His message was followed swiftly by another. Everything okay? I overheard some commotion up front, and soon after another alert. Marcus 12:49 p.m. I might have new intel from the steward in my section. Let's meet once we land. Evelyn's fingers flew over her screen as she typed a quick reply. Evelyn 12:50 p.m. I'm back in first now. Captain intervened. We'll talk after landing. Even as she shifted back to first class with a mix of relief and underlying suspicion, she knew Marcus's message meant that more was afoot. Marcus was gathering his own evidence from coach, meticulously noting how airline staff treated passengers of diverse backgrounds. His intel suggested that there were murmurs among crew and fellow travelers, snippets of behind-the-scenes complaints that hinted at a far graver injustice than a mere administrative error. His message had sparked hope in Evelyn that she was not alone in her experience, that together they could piece together a damning report on how preferential treatment and discriminatory policies were being silently enforced. The hum of the seatbelt sign turning off signaled the start of meal service in first class, a temporary reprieve amid the tension. The aroma of roasted chicken and seared salmon wafted temptingly through the cabin, offering a glimpse of normalcy. Evelyn, now seated comfortably at her new assignment, seat 5C, which she had received after the captain's personal intervention, found herself halfway through a carefully prepared plate of pasta when a crescendo of loud voices permeated the elegant surroundings. She recognized the anger in one voice as belonging to Veronica, the flight attendant who had earlier played a crucial role in her displacement. You were the one who insisted she move, Veronica hissed sharply as she spoke to another attendant, whose response was drowned out by the vehemence of Veronica's tone. I only followed your lead, came the hesitant reply from the colleague, a senior staff member whose words betrayed a mixture of uncertainty and dread. Even from her seat, Evelyn caught every fragment of the conversation. It was clear that the airline's staff, long aware that they had mishandled the seat assignment, feared the consequences of a formal complaint. The tension in the air thickened as the voices of the crew confirmed Evelyn's worst suspicions. This debacle was not just a trivial mistake, but a deliberate sidelining of her rightful place based on nothing more than her appearance. She kept her gaze fixed on her meal, though each bite of pasta felt laced with the bitterness of injustice. She knew that drawing attention to herself might force the staff into silence, but it also meant that every whispered conversation and every furtive glance was now indisputable evidence of a system steeped in discriminatory practices. Before long, a sudden outburst shattered the simmering atmosphere. A male voice bellowed from the aisle behind her. Don't you walk away from me, I want answers. Startled, Evelyn turned her head, only to see a passenger with disheveled hair and an oversized t-shirt glaring furiously at a flight attendant. His face was contorted in anger as he stormed down the aisle. I've been pressing the call button for 5 minutes. My wife needs help with an allergic reaction, and you're ignoring us, he roared, his voice echoing off the pristine walls of the cabin. In an instant, chaos erupted as passengers scrambled to see what was unfolding. Veronica rushed over in a flurry, her face awash with panic. The situation escalated rapidly. A fraught scene unfolded where the enraged husband pointed frantically at his wife, a woman slumped in her seat with a flushed, puffy face, and accused the crew of gross negligence. Evelyn's training kicked in instinctively, and without hesitation she unfastened her seatbelt and moved swiftly toward the commotion. When she arrived, the situation was dire. The woman's breathing was labored, and her lips had swollen alarmingly. Passengers formed a loose barrier, creating space for aid, as Evelyn quickly assessed the situation with the calm urgency learned from years of fieldwork. "What did she eat?" she asked urgently, eyes darting around for clues. The husband, his voice trembling with fear, managed to say that she was allergic to nuts. He recalled that she had become unwell about 15 minutes earlier, and insisted that if the meal was contaminated, it could be life-threatening. Evelyn's mind raced as she observed every detail. Time was of the essence, and she urged the flight attendants to call for medical help immediately. Scanning the overhead bins, she called out, "Does anyone have an EpiPen?" A man 2 rows ahead rose swiftly. "I have one in my bag," he declared, hastily retrieving it. At that moment, Veronica was scrambling to access the intercom to reach the captain. The urgency of the situation had transformed the cabin into a scene of controlled panic. "Is there a doctor on board?" "We have a medical emergency in row 6, came the strained voice of Veronica over the intercom. Within minutes, as if in a brief reprieve from the storm, the EpiPen was administered to the ailing woman. Her breathing eased ever so slightly, eliciting a collective sigh of relief from the gathered passengers. Although the crisis was stabilizing, the severity of the incident left an indelible mark on the atmosphere. The woman would still require medical attention upon landing, but for that fragile moment, there was hope. Yet, as the drama of the allergic reaction unfolded, another bitter undertone emerged. The husband's furious gaze landed repeatedly on the flight crew. "You nearly killed her," he shouted, his voice cracking with anguish. "She told you she was allergic and you ignored it. I was pressing the call button for so long. Why does nobody listen to the people in these seats?" His outburst reverberated powerfully across the cabin, exposing not only the immediate failure of duty but also the systemic neglect that infuriated many passengers. Whether the lack of responsiveness was driven by racism, classism, or an insidious apathy within the crew was the pressing question that Evelyn knew would fuel her investigation for months to come. After what felt like an eternity, the captain made an official announcement regarding the medical emergency, assuring everyone that paramedics would meet them at the Los Angeles gate. As calm gradually replaced chaos, the injured woman, now able to sip water and converse in soft, labored tones, became a symbol of a critical failure in passenger care. Her husband's glare, however, continued to burn, serving as a reminder that for some, the fight for respect and dignity was far from over. Evelyn returned to her new seat in first class, though the luxury of the plush recliner did little to soothe the turmoil churning inside her. The earlier dispute over her seat, combined with the lifeline of a medical emergency that had nearly spiraled into disaster, had further exposed the fractures in the system. She knew that in the formal report that would follow once the flight landed, both the discriminatory treatment she had endured and the neglectful handling of the medical crisis would serve as damning evidence of an institution teetering on the edge of systemic failure. As the cabin settled into a somber hush, the previously animated chatter died down, replaced by an undercurrent of shared apprehension. It was in this charged silence that Veronica, whose earlier conduct had been marked by both cruelty and compunction, chose to approach Evelyn once again. Slowly, almost tentatively, Veronica slipped into the seat beside her. Her usually composed features were now etched with fatigue and remorse, her eyes red-rimmed as if they had borne witness to unbearable guilt. "Ms. Monroe?" she said softly, her voice barely audible above the consistent hum of the engines. "I need to talk to you. Can we speak privately?" Evelyn's heart sank. She glanced around furtively. Most passengers were too absorbed in their own anxieties to pay her any heed, but a few curious eyes lingered. "Sure," she replied quietly, and together they slipped away to the small galley area once more, away from the prying eyes of a troubled cabin. In the dim light of the galley, Veronica's voice dropped to a hushed, urgent tone as she began to unravel the tangled web behind the series of events. "I know you probably hate me for what happened," Veronica began, her tone laden with regret and tension. "But it wasn't personal. The gate agent insisted, and I was told to get you out of that seat because they said your ticket was flagged as fraudulent. They claimed you were on some kind of watch list." Veronica's words, though whispered, hit Evelyn like a physical blow. The idea that her name, her credentials, her very right to travel in first class could be questioned on the basis of suspicion and racial profiling was more than just an administrative error. It was a damning testament to deep-rooted systemic prejudice. Evelyn's stomach knotted as she absorbed every word. The notion of a watch list, of her being seen as an imposter in her own right, was both infuriating and heartbreaking. She had meticulously purchased her seat with hard-earned money, and the thought that someone in a position of authority would consider her unworthy based solely on the color of her skin was an affront too bitter to swallow. "Veronica, do you know why the gate agent would think my ticket was fraudulent? Did she provide any proof or reason?" Evelyn asked, keeping her voice measured despite the storm raging inside her. Veronica shook her head slowly, tears threatening to spill over. "No, Miss Monroe. She mentioned something about people trying to scam their way into these seats all the time, but nothing made sense when I compared it to your valid reservation. I was so shaken when the captain got involved. He was furious that you had been forced to move." It was in those stark, painful moments that Evelyn felt the full weight of her battle, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been dismissed, discredited, or degraded by a system so callous that it would question their legitimacy based on appearance. Every injustice she experienced became the fuel for a slow-burning revolution inside her. "There it is," Evelyn murmured bitterly. "An implicit assumption that a black woman in first class must be trying to cheat the system." Her voice trembled with both anger and a resolute determination. Veronica's eyes, filled with regret and fear, darted away momentarily as she mustered the courage to speak again. I know I did what I was told, but I never wanted to hurt you. I feel awful. You must understand that I'm prepared to face the consequences if it means telling the truth." Evelyn's heart softened at the vulnerability in Veronica's tone, yet the enormity of the betrayal still stung like a fresh wound. "You're doing the right thing," she said reassuringly, though her tone was laced with an undercurrent of resolve that foretold of the retribution to come. "If you ever need to file a report or talk to someone in authority, I can give you the contact for the Department of Transportation's Aviation Discrimination Hotline. They handle cases like this." Veronica blinked, surprised by Evelyn's specific knowledge, but nodded slowly, murmuring her promise to do just that. They sat in reflective silence for what felt like an eternity until, about an hour before landing, the plane hit a sudden bout of turbulence. The seatbelt sign flashed on sharply, and the captain's reassuring voice came over the intercom, instructing everyone to remain seated. The turbulence was a physical reminder of the instability not only outside the plane, but within the very framework of the policies that had wronged Evelyn. In that brief period of forced stillness, as the plane rocked and passengers gripped their armrests in silent anxiety, Evelyn's mind churned with thoughts of retaliation. Evelyn began to think about how she would transform this moment of deep personal humiliation into an act of grand retribution. A reckoning that would force the airline, its staff, and everyone complicit in the racist practices to answer for their actions in a way so resounding that it would leave the entire industry reeling. Memories of every disparaging remark, every dismissive gesture, and every preconceived notion that had undermined her confidence over the years coalesced into a powerful resolve. She envisioned a future where her testimony, supported by meticulous evidence from this flight, would not only hold the airline accountable but would serve as a beacon of hope and resistance for all who had suffered similar indignities. As the turbulent moments passed and the seatbelt sign was eventually switched off, the cabin gradually returned to a state of uneasy normalcy. Passengers resumed their activities, though the lingering shock of the crisis and the revelations in the galley left an indelible tension in the air. Evelyn, now more determined than ever, resolved that once the plane landed, she would launch a full-scale investigation. Her report would be so detailed and irrefutable that it would force regulatory bodies, lawmakers, and even influential members of the airline industry to confront the systematic discrimination at play. With renewed resolve, Evelyn scanned the cabin. Her eyes caught glimpses of both overt and subtle cues of inequality. A white passenger adjusting his designer cufflinks as if it were a badge of superiority. The muted expressions of sympathy from a few minority travelers who recognized in her struggle a reflection of their own battles, and the furtive glances exchanged among crew members who knew deep down that what had happened was a gross injustice. Each sight fueled her determination to expose the rot at the core of the system. Evelyn began formulating a plan. In her mind, she charted out a strategy that would not only expose the flagrant abuse of power by individuals like Karen White, but would also dismantle the outdated policies that allowed such discrimination to persist. She decided that the first step would be to compile every piece of evidence she had collected during this flight: the texts from Marcus, the statements from Veronica, her own detailed observations of the crew's behavior, and the chaotic mishandling of a life-threatening medical emergency. Once she landed, she would file a report so comprehensive that it would leave no room for the airline to deny its culpability. Her thoughts drifted back to the earlier encounter in the galley with Veronica. The revelation that her own valid ticket had been questioned, that she had been deemed unworthy of first-class comfort simply because of a predisposed bias, would serve as one of the most damning pieces of evidence in her case. Evelyn was not only fighting for herself, but for every passenger who had ever been marginalized and mistreated by an institution that prioritized profit and prejudice over basic human decency. As the landing approached neared, the atmosphere in the cabin thickened with anticipation. The pilot's announcement that paramedics would be waiting at the gate in Los Angeles provided a temporary reassurance, but Evelyn knew that her battle was far from over. Every minute that the plane had carried her through this ordeal had reinforced her resolve. She recalled how Veronica had confessed that the gate agent had even suggested that her presence in first class was an anomaly, an unwelcome one, and that she was not supposed to be there. That damning admission was the key that could unlock a cascade of accountability. Evelyn's thoughts turned to the potential impact of her report. She envisioned a media storm, an outpouring of support from civil rights activists, outraged customers, and even regulatory scrutiny that would force the airline to institute sweeping reforms. She would use every channel available, including testimony in front of congressional committees and press conferences that would spotlight the egregious behavior of those involved. Her aim was not merely retribution in the personal sense, but to send a message loud and clear. Discrimination, whether overt or covert, would no longer be tolerated in any form within the aviation industry. Soon the aircraft began its descent, the hustle and bustle of passengers gathering their belongings, the murmur of relief mingled with lingering anxiety, and the palpable sense of injustice shared silently by many created a bittersweet symphony of emotions. Evelyn sat back in her first-class seat, her earlier meal forgotten, her mind abuzz with plans for a confrontation that promised to be not just a personal victory, but a catalyst for a far-reaching revolution against discrimination. Veronica, still sitting by her side, lowered her eyes as the reality of the impending landing set in. In a quiet voice, laden with both regret and determination, she said, "Miss Monroe, I want you to know I am truly sorry for everything. I didn't have a choice, I was following orders. But I promise, from now on I will speak up. I will help you expose this, no matter what it takes." Evelyn placed a gentle hand on Veronica's, her own eyes hardening with resolve. "Thank you," she replied softly. because once this flight lands, we're going to ensure that every single unfair action is brought into the light. We will make sure that this isn't just another story that gets swept under the rug. This is our chance to shake things up, to let everyone know that discrimination has no place in our skies." Veronica nodded, and for a brief moment, amid the impending din of landing gear and the chatter of excited, anxious passengers, an unspoken pact was sealed between them. They were no longer just a victim and a reluctant accomplice. They were partners in a struggle that had the power to change the very fabric of air travel and social justice in America. As the plane taxied to the gate at Los Angeles International Airport, Evelyn Monroe closed her eyes and took a deep, measured breath. She allowed herself a moment of silent reflection, a fleeting instant of vulnerability mixed with an unyielding determination that pulsed like the beat of a marching drum. This flight, with all its turmoil and heartache, would become the cornerstone of a sweeping campaign for accountability. Every piece of evidence she gathered would form a formidable case against those who had perpetuated these injustices. The moment the aircraft came to a complete stop and the door swung open to reveal a throng of paramedics and airport staff, Evelyn knew that her actions in the coming days would reverberate far beyond the cold, sterile walls of that cabin. She was going to transform her personal ordeal into a clarion call for retribution, a bold, sweeping response that would leave the entire airline industry, and perhaps the nation, exclaiming in disbelief at the audacity of the justice she would unleash. With a determined glint in her eye, Evelyn stepped off the plane and into the bright, glaring lights of Los Angeles, her every step echoing with the promise of retributive justice. She felt as though she were walking into the future, a future where every whispered complaint, every ticket flagged on a baseless watch list, every time a minority passenger was dismissed or belittled, would finally be reckoned with. A report would be submitted to the Department of Transportation, to every regulatory body that had turned a blind eye for too long. Her evidence, meticulously documented through every painful moment of that flight, would expose the ugly truth behind the veneer of polite service. In the days that followed, as Evelyn prepared to unveil her findings to a stunned public in a furious regulatory environment, she continued to receive messages from Marcus and Veronica, their voices a reminder that she was not alone in this fight. Together, they began to orchestrate an unprecedented campaign, one that promised to bring an end to discriminatory practices with a vengeance so complete it would force every airline executive to rewrite their protocols and every crew member to reevaluate their conduct. For Evelyn Monroe, the pain of being treated as less than she was transformed into a burning desire to ensure that no one else would ever have to endure such indignity. Thus, as the sun set over Los Angeles and the first glimmers of a new day appeared on the horizon, Evelyn stepped forward as a warrior for justice, a woman whose quiet dignity had erupted into a force that would forever alter the course of aviation history. In her wake, a spark had been lit, one that would ignite a firestorm of accountability, a response so grand that all who had once wielded their power with thoughtless cruelty would be forced to confront the consequences of their actions. And as the celebrations of a hard-won victory began to ripple across the media and civil society, Evelyn Monroe's story became a beacon of hope and an undeniable testament to the resilience of those who refused to be silenced. Evelyn Monroe felt the violent rattle of trays and the ominous shake of overhead bins as turbulence suddenly engulfed the aircraft. Across the aisle, the plaintive wail of a baby pierced the chaos, sending a shiver down her spine. In that disorienting moment, every detail of her journey, from the unjust seat reassignment and the brazen racial assumptions of the gate agent to the life-threatening mishandling of a medical emergency, swirled in her mind like a storm of injustice. Evelyn could almost recite the final report in her head: blatant discrimination, a callous disregard for passenger safety, and a system failing to protect the most vulnerable. As the flight attendants scrambled to strap themselves into their jump seats, abruptly halting any semblance of calm conversation, Evelyn's thoughts turned inward. She recalled every damning bullet point that now painted a systemic failure. The inconsiderate act of pushing her out of first class, the careless instructions that had left a woman battling an allergic reaction, and the furtive whispers that suggested her very presence in that cabin was deemed a threat by those in power. When the turbulence finally eased, the pilot's announcement that they were beginning their descent into Los Angeles provided little comfort. Instead, it underscored the precarious state of a system that had already failed her and many others. In the final rush of the flight attendants as they rushed to complete cabin checks, Evelyn's observant eyes caught sight of Carla, the older flight attendant who had been conspicuously absent since the allergic reaction debacle. Carla emerged from behind a curtain looking disheveled, her uniform rumpled as she hurriedly took a seat in the jump seat at the front of first class. She avoided eye contact with the passengers, as though the memory of the earlier events had left her internally fractured. Evelyn caught a snippet of a hushed conversation between Carla and another attendant strapped in beside her. Carla muttered, "I am not taking the fall for that gate agent's nonsense." To which her companion replied, "Just do your job, Carla. We will sort this out on the ground." These words, fleeting yet potent, confirmed for Evelyn that not everyone among the crew was blind to the injustice unfolding, and it only deepened the fissure between those complicit and those with even a hint of remorse. Soon, the plane landed smoothly at Los Angeles International Airport. Paramedics hurried on board to render aid to the woman who had suffered from the allergic reaction. Her husband, his face a canvas of gratitude mixed with lingering anger, assisted her into a wheelchair. A few passengers clapped politely, relieved that the immediate crisis was under control, though the overall mood was far from celebratory. Evelyn gathered her belongings while carefully observing the disembarkation process, her mind still processing the cascade of events that had so brutally exposed the system's flaws. As she passed by the cockpit door, Evelyn noticed Veronica, the flight attendant who had earlier tried to justify the move from first class, conferring with the captain. Moments later, Marcus materialized from the economy section with a grave expression. In the bustling arrivals terminal, amid the constant flow of travelers, some waiting to board the next leg of their journey, others reuniting with loved ones, Evelyn and Marcus quickly retreated to a quiet corner near baggage claim to debrief and compare notes. The warm California air filtered in as they stood away from the throngs of people, each of them silently acknowledging the emotional weight they now carried. Marcus handed her a bottled water and asked, "You good?" To which Evelyn replied with a soft nod, admitting, "A lot happened up front." Marcus continued, "I watched at least 3 instances where staff ignored passengers who needed help. Everyone who received prompt service in my section was white or obviously affluent. The others were left waiting." Evelyn sipped her water slowly while she recounted how Veronica had admitted that she was told to remove Evelyn from first class because the gate agent thought her ticket was a scam or that she was on some watch list. Who knows if that was code for something else, Evelyn wondered, voice low with simmering indignation. Marcus nodded grimly, confirming that his own overheard chatter from passengers echoed that story. As the conversation continued, their words mingled with the ambient sounds of arrivals. Evelyn's gaze swept over the crowd, taking in the sight of a man in a sharp suit, suspected to be an airline manager, standing with folded arms near the flight crew, waiting for a briefing on the incident. She weaved through clusters of travelers until she reached a less congested area by the baggage carousel where Marcus had already settled. Their discussion turned from recounting events to planning the next steps. "We file the report under our official credentials," Evelyn declared with a surge of clarity. "We escalate this to the Department of Transportation's Enforcement Division and recommend a formal inquiry. This flight alone has enough evidence of multiple violations to force change." Marcus agreed, and together they resolved to compile every detail, every intercepted conversation, and every piece of evidence to make their case unassailable. While they waited for their luggage, Evelyn spotted Carla again, this time strolling past with a rolling suitcase. Her posture was tense, her eyes darting about as though she dreaded any confrontation. Seizing the moment, Evelyn approached her in a measured, calm voice. "Excuse me, Carla," she said, ensuring her tone remained firm but devoid of overt anger. Carla turned, and in that moment a flicker of recognition and dread flashed in her eyes. Evelyn continued, "I just wanted to let you know that I understand the gate agent pressured the cabin crew, but I will be filing an official complaint about the seat incident." Her voice carried the weight of authority and the sorrow of countless wrongs inflicted upon her and others. Carla hesitated, then defensively murmured, "I was just told your seat was a mistake. We do get scammers sometimes, and I was just following orders." Marcus, who had been listening from the side, stepped forward and interjected calmly, "You were so concerned about a scammer that you kicked a paying passenger out of first class without any offer of compensation or a proper explanation." The accusation hung in the air, and Carla's face contorted in discomfort as she muttered, "You don't understand. The gate agent said you were an unauthorized occupant. They get stowaways sometimes." Evelyn fixed her with a steady gaze and replied, "I had a valid boarding pass and ID. There was no reason to suspect anything other than your own prejudiced assumptions." Carla's eyes widened and she turned away, attempting to escape the inevitable confrontation, but Evelyn pressed on, her voice unwavering. "Along with the complaint, I am also an investigator from the Department of Transportation. My colleague and I will include your statement in our official report. Do you wish to add anything now, or remain silent?" For a moment, time seemed to slow as Carla's mouth fell open. Then, with tears welling in her eyes, she whispered, "I had no idea. I was just following instructions. Please, you have to believe me. I don't want to lose my job." Marcus's voice, soft yet encouraging, chimed in. "Honesty might actually help you, Carla. Blaming the gate agent or hiding the truth won't change anything." Carla nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks as she muttered her remorseful agreement before turning and disappearing into the crowd. Later that evening, in the relative quiet of her room at the Westin Bonaventure Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, Evelyn slumped onto the king-size bed with her laptop balanced on her knees. The sprawling city lights that twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows barely registered as she methodically typed up the day's notes. Every moment from her arrival at JFK to the final conversation with Carla was documented with painstaking detail. A sudden knock on the door interrupted her focus. Peering through the peephole, she saw Marcus standing there with a somber expression and a small pizza box under his arm. Opening the door, she welcomed him in with a tired smile, grateful for the modest comfort. "Figured you hadn't eaten," he said quietly as he handed her the box. In that quiet moment, Evelyn Monroe realized that her personal struggle had grown into a battle for accountability that would reverberate far beyond that single flight. Every piece of evidence she gathered, the initial humiliation, the crew's covert admissions, and the systemic negligence in the medical emergency would stand as a testament against discrimination in the airline industry. Her report would not only challenge the status quo, but would serve as a beacon of hope for every individual who had ever been treated as less than human. As the night deepened in Los Angeles, Evelyn continued to compile the day's notes. Her determination was unyielding, and as she prepared to send the preliminary report to the Department of Transportation in the early hours of the morning, she promised herself that this would be a turning point, a moment when the abuses of power and the prejudice festering within the industry would finally be brought to light for all to see. Evelyn Monroe felt a renewed fire as the turbulent final moments of Flight AA1198 faded into history. Trays rattled, the baby cried, and chaos reigned during the last minutes of descent into Los Angeles. Yet amidst that storm, every injustice had crystallized into undeniable evidence. In the conference room, facing regional managers Joseph Peterson and Andrea Lee, Evelyn and her partner Marcus laid out a damning dossier of discriminatory practices, botched medical responses, and biased actions that stripped her of her rightful seat. All orchestrated by the hateful gate agent Karen White and complicit crew members. As they pressed for accountability, The manager's guarded smiles gave way to grim resignation. A final email with the urgent subject, "Possible pattern of discriminatory practices," was sent before turning off the lights at her hotel. Later, as Veronica, once fearful and now courageous, recounted how Karen branded Evelyn an unauthorized occupant, every word seared with the truth. The fallout was swift. A multi-million-dollar fine, mandatory diversity training, and firings that sent shockwaves through the airline industry. Stepping into Chicago O'Hare with her head held high, Evelyn smiled at a passing gate agent who no longer doubted her worth. Her battle had ignited a movement, proving that even a single moment of injustice can kindle change that transforms society.